This happened to me just after my wife had passed away. And there was no way that anyone could have known this was coming. And it really happened. So, I had been a full-time touring musician for many years. And I had been married for about 5 years at this point. And my wife was the love of my life. And she was actually pregnant with our first child, a baby girl that we were gonna name Willow. And she was due to be born the day after my birthday. So it was always funny that her birthday was April Fool's Day. She would always joke that she would be born laughing. But anyway, it was our first child. We were so excited to be becoming parents. And unfortunately, she miscarried without warning. It was devastating for both of us. And then, less than a year later, she was diagnosed with cancer. And it was aggressive, and she passed away 2 months later. Within a span of 1 year, I lost my wife and I lost my unborn daughter. I didn't know what to do. I just felt completely lost. So my mother-in-law suggested that I go visit her family cabin, which was about 2 hours away from my home. And I thought, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Maybe I can just get away for a few days and I'll feel better. So I packed up my car and I drove to this cabin. It was a beautiful place. I had been there many times before. It was secluded, surrounded by forest. You couldn't see or hear any neighbors. It was the perfect place to get away and grieve. The only problem was that I wasn't alone. My wife's brother decided that he wanted to come along for the ride. He was grieving too, obviously, but I knew that he was also hoping that I wouldn't stay there by myself. I mean, he was worried about me. But I was still angry at him because when my wife passed away, he said, "Why don't you come stay with us?" And then he followed that up by saying, "You know, you probably need some time to process things on your own." And so he kind of pushed me away when I needed my friends and my family the most. But anyway, so I got to the cabin, and everything was set up. All I had to do was just drive in, unpack my stuff, start a fire, and hopefully, in a few days, I'd feel a little bit better. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But another strange thing did happen. So the second that we arrived, we started hearing music playing, and it was classical music. It was Chopin, I think. And it was really loud. I thought, what the hell is going on here? This is the middle of nowhere. There are no speakers outside. And then we went inside. It was coming from the living room. And the weird part was that the living room was completely empty. There was no speakers there. There was no stereo system there. There was no instruments. The only thing that was in the living room was a piano. But it was an old piano. It was covered in dust. It looked like it hadn't been played in decades. And we were confused because we didn't bring a piano there. That was not a piano that was already in the cabin. So we didn't know what was going on. We were thinking that maybe a neighbor was playing the piano, but there weren't any neighbors. So we were even more confused. And then it stopped playing. And we thought, wow, that was freaky. Let's just unload the car and hopefully that doesn't happen again. And the music didn't play again until we finished unloading the car and we went inside and we made dinner. And then the music started up again. And I thought, well, let's go check it out. Maybe we can figure this out. But every time we would get close to the piano, the music would stop. And we were sitting down trying to eat, and the music started up again. So we were getting really freaked out at this point. We finally decided that we should just go to sleep. So we split up. I took the couch, and he took the other bedroom. And when we woke up the next morning, I thought maybe I just dreamed that whole thing. That was crazy. But then I walked into the kitchen, and I saw my friend sitting there at the table with his eyes closed, listening to the piano, and he was crying. And I asked him, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Why aren't you up?" And I said, "Why aren't you asleep?" And he said, "I haven't slept. The music has been playing all night." And I said, "You're kidding." And he said, "No, I've been listening to it, and it's driving me insane." Well, at this point, we decided that we were gonna figure this out. So we went back into the living room, and we started dusting off the piano. And as I was dusting off the piano, I noticed something strange. On the leg of the piano, there was what looked like a pentagram, and then underneath the pentagram, there was writing. And the writing said, "You will never escape." And I thought, this is crazy. But then I continued dusting off the piano, and I noticed there were numbers carved into the wood. And those numbers were dates. And those dates were the exact same dates that my wife and I had our first date, and the date that she passed away. And then I looked underneath the piano, and I saw another pentagram carved into the wood underneath the piano. And this one had the same symbol that was on the leg of the piano. And I thought, this is crazy. What is going on here? Well, I started playing around with the numbers and the symbols, and I realized that if I pressed a certain sequence of notes on the piano, the music that we had been hearing would start playing. And at first it was just the melody. But then, as I continued playing the song, more instruments started playing. It was like a full orchestra. And I thought, how is this possible? And then my friend started freaking out, and he said, "We have to get out of here. This is insane. This is satanic." But I was curious, and I wanted to know what song was being played. And so I continued playing the song, and it was a lullaby. It was a very slow and peaceful song. And I started thinking maybe this isn't satanic. Maybe it's just a really cool music box that someone left behind. And maybe that person just wanted to share their music with us. So I continued playing the song, and the music slowly faded out, and I was left sitting at this old, dusty piano in this empty room. And I thought, what the hell just happened? Well, we packed up our stuff and we left. We never went back to that cabin, and we never figured out who was playing the piano. I don't know if there's a logical explanation for what happened, but I do know that my wife loved that song. She used to sing it to Willow when she was still in my wife's belly, and I like to think that she was there playing the piano